Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Each and every month, we send happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee. That means anything from a 20th to a 100th anniversary. This is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse film discussion group. And if you've just discovered our program, welcome. If you're a regular listener, we're delighted to have you back. Come with us now as we travel back to Ireland 100 years ago and visit the picturesque village of Innisfree, birthplace of Sean Thornton and home to a certain red-headed lass he will fall in love with, as depicted in John Ford's classic The Quiet Man, which first premiered in the UK on June 6, 1952. To commemorate its 70th anniversary, I'll be joined this month by two terrific guests. Now, first up is Joseph McBride, a film professor at San Francisco State University, a cinema historian, and the author of several books, including Searching for John Ford and Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge. Then I'll talk with Des MacHale, a mathematics professor at University College Cork in Ireland, and the author of The Complete Guide to the Quiet Man. Together, we will explore why The Quiet Man remains so beloved around the world, its cultural impact, elements considered controversial today, and more. But before we Irish up this episode with the pros, how about we learn a little bit more about the making of The Quiet Man? Now, according to Wikipedia, The Quiet Man is a 1952 American romantic comedy drama film directed by John Ford. It tells the story of Sean Thornton, an American who returns to Innisfree, the Irish village of his birth, to live in peace and happiness. Soon after arriving, he quickly falls for Mary Kate Danaher, a fierce-tempered woman who requires the blessing of her brother, Will, to marry Sean. But conflict ensues when Sean learns that marriage and social acceptance in Innisfree requires abiding by customs and traditions he doesn't agree with. The movie stars John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara, Barry Fitzgerald, Ward Bond, and Victor McLaughlin. The screenplay by Frank S. Nugent was based on a 1933 Saturday Evening Post short story of the same name by Maurice Walsh, later published as part of a collection entitled The Green Rushes. Republic Pictures agreed to finance the film with Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne starring and with Ford directing, but only if all three agreed to first film a Western with Republic. They did, and after completing Rio Grande, they headed for Ireland to start shooting. One of the conditions that Republic placed on Ford was that the film run under 2 hours. However, the finished picture was 2 hours and 9 minutes. When screening the film for Republic executives, Ford stopped the film at approximately 2 hours in, on the verge of the film's climactic scene. Republic executives relented and allowed the film to run its full length. It was one of the few movies that Republic filmed in Technicolor. The Quiet Man employed many actors from the Irish theater, including Barry Fitzgerald's brother, Arthur Shields, as well as extras from the Irish countryside, and it is one of the few Hollywood movies in which the Irish language can be heard. Filming commenced on June 7, 1951. Most of the outdoor scenes were shot on location in Ireland in County Mayo and County Galway. The inside scenes were filmed toward the end of July at the Republic Studios in Hollywood. The movie was something of a departure for Wayne and Ford, who were both known mostly for westerns and other action-oriented films. It was also a departure for Republic Pictures, which backed Ford in what was considered a risky venture at the time. It was the only time the studio, known for low-budget B-movies, released a film that would receive an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. John Ford eventually won the Academy Award for Best Director, his fourth, and Winton Hoke won for Best Cinematography. In 1996, readers of the Irish Times newspaper voted The Quiet Man as the greatest Irish movie ever made. In 2013, the movie was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Today, The Quiet Man commands a 91% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where its average critical score earns an 8 out of 10. The man may have been quiet, but the original theatrical trailer was not. let's say we give a listen to it right now.
I'd like to tell you about The Quiet Man. He's John Wayne in a picture you'll soon be cheering. It's the story of Sean Thornton, a right-intended man who came from America to forget his past in Innisfree. There he met a fiery red-headed lass, and the village marriage broker went to work.
That's a pretty bonnet you have on.
Bonnet? Don't you be talking to me about bonnets. After leaving mine stuck up there like a...
Easy now. Have the good manners not to hit the man until he's your husband and entitled to hit you back.
Then her bully of a brother, Red Will Danaher, refused to pay her rightful dowry.
There'll be no locks or bolts between us, Mary Kate, except those in your own mercenary little heart.
Mary Kate left him to go to Dublin, but he caught her at the station and brought her back with the whole town watching him do it.
I'll pay you. Never.
Then the fight was on, a fight they're still talking about in Innisfree. It's a wonderful picture, the finest ever brought to the screen by John Ford, and he's won 3 Academy Awards. His direction makes unforgettable the performances of John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara, Barry Fitzgerald, and Victor McLaughlin.
All right, I couldn't possibly be a responsible podcast host without cautioning you before we head into the heart of our episode that my guests and I, yes, will be discussing spoilers.
Do that, lad. It's your duty.
Hence, if you've never laid eyes on The Quiet Man, go put down the earbuds for a spell and give it a stream, a rental, or a spin on the trusty disc player. Because the last thing you want is for McAleen to be shaming you.
Yes. You had your chance and you flubbed it.
Now that we're all fully prepared, on with the show. Returning to our podcast is Joseph McBride, a film professor at San Francisco State University, cinema historian, biographer, screenwriter, and author of several books, including Frank Capra, The Catastrophe of Success, Steven Spielberg, A Biography, and Searching for John Ford. Joe, we are delighted to have you back on Cineversary. Welcome back to our show, and thanks for saying yes.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's always good to be on the show, and it's a wonderful way to pay tribute to great classic films and their anniversaries.
Absolutely. For those keeping score, we did have Joe last on, it was earlier 2021, to celebrate the 80th anniversary of Citizen Kane. So you've been on for a couple of John Ford films so far, as well as an Orson Welles movie and Frank Capra film. So let's get into it, Joe. Why is The Quiet Man worth celebrating 70 years on? In what ways has it stood the test of time, do you think, and how does it still matter?
It's one of John Ford's most deeply personal films. He wanted to end his career with The Quiet Man at one point. I'm glad he didn't, because he made several great films after that, but he saw it as a culmination of his life and work. He was very proud of being Irish at a time when in America pride in your ethnic heritage was discouraged, actually. We were supposed to, and I remember this from when I was a kid in the 50s, we were supposed to believe in the melting pot, where we all melted down our ethnic characteristics into some kind of bland American nature, whatever that is. But we're a nation of immigrants, as John F. Kennedy calls us, and Ford's parents were immigrants from Galway and the west of Ireland. And Charles Fitzsimons, who's one of the actors in the film, who's a brother of Maureen O'Hara, said that the great tragedy of Ford's life was that he was not born in Ireland, and he sometimes even claimed he was. But it's a very poetic, beautifully crafted, sublime film. It's kind of a dream vision of Ireland, but the comedy and drama both stem from reality intruding into the dream.
Yeah, I mean, for my take, Joe, arguably, I think this feature is to Irish Americans what a movie like, say, Moonstruck is to Italian Americans. A romantic comedy that, yes, reinforces some unfortunate tropes and some exaggerations about a particular ethnic group, but which remains beloved by many in that culture. And it endures as probably the favorite movie among Irish Americans, as well as the most beloved film by Ford among his many fans around the world. But you don't have to be Irish to adore the film, right? I mean, viewers of any race or background can relish the story, the characters, the entertainment value.
Well, yeah, it's a super entertaining film, very popular film. I don't think the ethnic representations are unfortunate, but we could talk about that. I've written a lot about Ford's Irishness and how he uses type characters and makes them real and three-dimensional, and plays against the characters in the Quiet Man are aware that they are, if you will, stereotypes or type characters. Like Barry Fitzgerald gives a great performance, but he's kind of self-consciously playing that archetypal character.
Yeah,
and
having fun with it, right?
Having fun with it. Yeah, it is a favorite film of Irish Americans, maybe sometimes in a way that distorts the complexity of the film. It's like It's a Wonderful Life is a favorite of a lot of people for maybe the wrong reasons, that they miss the darkness of that film, and they miss the darkness of The Quiet Man. It's a very dark fable in some ways. It is really an Irish American's fantasy of Ireland.
Yes.
But ironically, the Irish Times in the late 90s had a poll of their readers for the greatest Irish film, and The Quiet Man won the poll.
Yes.
And it's not really an Irish film, it's an American film, but they see it as an Irish film. They've embraced the film now after they were uncomfortable with it for a long time. And Leonard Maltin told me that one time he went to Ireland and went to some video store, and they were selling it under the counter, kind of like pornography, you know. But the guy told him it was a very popular film anyway.
Wow.
You know.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad you riffed on this, because I think it's also stood the test of time because of the cast, this flawless cast, in my opinion, boasting a roster that includes so many Irish American actors, most notably John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara. They're both Irish American. These are parts that they seem born to play to me. The pair, they create this palpable sexual tension, romantic chemistry, and a plausible power struggle. That's thanks in large part to O'Hara's pluck, her verve, her ability to match or exceed Wayne's powerful presence. And you think about how the production is also graced by many other Irish thespians, or Irish-American thespians, if you will. We talked about Barry Fitzgerald as McAleen. There's Victor McLaughlin. Now, he's British, but, I mean, he does have some Irish roots, from what I understand. Red Will Danaher he plays. There's Ward Bond as the priest, and Arthur Shields, and even John Ford's brother Francis. So from top to bottom, I mean, it's pretty well stacked ethnically in terms of being authentic to that heritage, right?
Yeah, he actually has a lot of Irish thespians in it. For example, Jack McGowan, one of the world's greatest actors, who is the greatest performer of Samuel Beckett plays. He plays the stooge for McLaughlin, who's always cleaning up his messes. And
Right.
O'Hara would probably dispute being called an Irish American. She was proudly Irish. She had a home in Ireland. She actually moved to Idaho in her old age to be with her grandson, and died in America. But I'd say she was really just Irish. And Barry Fitzgerald, I mean, some of these people worked in Hollywood a lot. That's why we maybe think of them as partly ours. But Barry Fitzgerald was a great actor in the Irish theater, the Abbey Theater, and Eileen Crowe, who plays Arthur Shields' wife. Arthur Shields was Barry Fitzgerald's brother. They were both Protestants, actually. And so it's a blend of Americans. But see, John Wayne, one of the things that's crucial to the film, John Wayne is exiled twice over in the film. He's supposed to have been born in Ireland, but he came to America as a boy. And then they had a hard life in America. He worked in steel mills in Pittsburgh. He became a boxer and killed a man in the ring, and that's why he goes back to Ireland. So he exiles himself from the United States at the beginning of the film, but he's a double exile, and it's about cultural conflicts to some extent. He has trouble relating to the Irish customs, such as the dowry that means so much.
Oh yeah, we're going to get into that, absolutely.
Yeah, and they have trouble relating to him in some ways too. But it's very good natured. But it stems from dark impulses. He kills a man. You know, one thing I'd like to point out is Ford, you know, in World War II, spent 4 years in the Navy and the OSS filming combat and making training films, reconnaissance films, and so he had seen a lot of combat. And after the war, he made mostly films about war. Almost all his post-war films before The Quiet Man were about war in one shape or another, or combat, such as My Darling Clementine is kind of about a military combat between the Earps and the Clantons. But this film, I think, is this exorcism of the demon of war. It's about a pacifist killer, and how do you get over the PTSD, as we now call it, of having been a killer and try to have a new life.
Right.
And that's what the film is about. Yeah.
Yeah, no question there. So just to kind of round out the thoughts here on why it still matters, how it stood the test of time. Of course, it still matters because more than any other motion picture, The Quiet Man has boosted Irish tourism and interest in vacationing in Ireland since its release. Now, this was told to me by Des MacHale, and upon doing research a little bit of my own, I've never visited Ireland myself, but that kind of makes sense because here in the States, I mean, this is shown every year on or around St. Patrick's Day, and it has been since I was a little one. And so when you think of Ireland, you often and cinema, you often think first perhaps of this movie. Ford, he creates this iconography that most people who have never visited the Emerald Isle imagine when they think of Ireland, you know, for better or worse. I mean, he may not have captured it authentically. There are some shots that are not shot in Ireland, of course. But thanks in part to the choice to shoot in glorious Technicolor, to shoot on location, I mean, he really does the country justice in a lot of the sequences here.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you ruminate on how this film features one of the most memorable kisses in classic movie history. And that's captured in the scene where Sean grabs Mary-Kate's wrist, swings her to him for a passionate embrace. We see it echoed in E.T., where they bring that shot back. There are two famous kissing scenes in this film, you could argue, but that in particular is one that has really stood the test of time. And I think it's also defied its age, Joe, partly because it remains a relatively straightforward narrative. It's not overcomplicated, although there are some politics and some customs and mores that can be a little hard if you're first watching The Quiet Man. Nevertheless, relatively straightforward narrative that audiences don't have to overthink to appreciate. I think it tells this story tongue-in-cheek without taking things too seriously, and it's more of a lighthearted Irish fairy tale, to me anyway, than a sobering adult romantic drama.
Well, I think it's both.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that's the complexity of the film. It's more complex than it appears at face value, as we've already alluded to. Maurice Walsh wrote the short story,
Mm-hmm.
and Ford and his screenwriter Frank Nugent embellished and changed a lot of it. For a long time, Ford he first took an option on the story in 1936, and he had great trouble getting Hollywood studios to approve this film. A lot of them turned it down.
Right.
It seems kind of odd in retrospect because it seems, you know, so popular. But the story deals with the troubles in Ireland. You know, that Sean Kelvin, his name is, in the story, comes back and he fights for the IRA, and it's the 1920s, and they had a terrible civil war after the War of Independence,
Mm-hmm.
and those events are very strong in the story. And Ford retained those for quite a while in various screenplays. Richard Llewellyn and Lawrence Stallings wrote scripts, and I think that was one of the reasons the studios turned it down, aside from the fact that they didn't go on location very often, and the idea of going to Ireland for location work it's expensive. Technicolor cameras over in Ireland, and also being far from the studios, the studios felt they didn't have control, but Ford liked it that way. That's why he liked going on location. But as the story progressed, Ford cut away a lot of the political elements, and there are allusions to the IRA. The priest, Ward Bond,
Mm-hmm.
and a couple of other guys run an IRA cell, it's alluded to, and they mentioned the IRA at one point. One of the odd things about the film, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, and viewers will have different reactions. The time period is kind of indeterminate. It could be the 1920s, judging from the train and the cars, but some of the costumes look very contemporary, and rural Ireland hasn't changed that much even today. I've gone to the location, and I've gone to Ford's family home. The Feeneys is what their real name was, where he came from in Galway. But you know, it could be 1952, it could be the 20s. It's kind of a Neverland fantasy thing. But that's Sean's fantasy. If you're going back to Ireland, he's a very romantic guy, and he thinks it's going to be wonderful. He's going to marry this wonderful, redheaded woman, and he has all these dreams. And Ford's films about Ireland, he made a number of them are romantic visions. They're not particularly realistic, and that's not what he was into.
No, it's the same approach to his westerns. I mean, if you look to the westerns for historical fact in John Ford films, you're going to be disappointed.
Yes and no. I mean, he deals with a lot of historical facts in his films, but he blends them with romanticization.
That's what I'm talking about.
But
Right.
In his historic westerns too, there's a conflict between the legend and the fact, as Liberty Valance puts it, the man who showed Liberty Valance, and that's what actually The Quiet Man is dealing with. That too, is the legend or the romantic view of Ireland is what Sean expects. And every step of the way, he's met with the reality that the people there are three-dimensional people who are not fantasy figures. Like the woman, for example, she's a feisty, independent woman. There's a woman named Brandon French who is a psychologist now, who wrote a book on the brink of revolt about women in the 50s, and she has Mary Kate Danaher on the cover, and she said she's a transitional figure. She's a fiercely independent woman fighting for her dowry, which a lot of American viewers don't understand the dowry, and they kind of minimize it, and they think that Mary Kate is just being stubborn. But it's her financial independence. It's very important to her. It's her possessions that her mother left her, and she wants her husband to stand up for her rights, and she's going to hold out relations until he gives in, but he doesn't want to fight, and she compels him to fight her brother. But another thing people misunderstand is the big fight scene, which is very funny and very beautifully staged, is all a big sham created by Mary Kate as a kind of a drama to display to the townspeople that he's willing to fight for her, but it's not a serious fight. Victor McLaughlin's a lot older than John Wayne. He was actually a champion boxer in his youth. He was the champion of the British Empire in boxing, and he fought Jack Johnson, the great American heavyweight champion, for three. Okay. He survived 3 rounds in the ring with Jack Johnson. That was his proudest achievement, even more than getting an Oscar for The Informer.
You were talking a bit about John Ford, and I want to get into how this might have been a deviation from previous Ford films and what distinctive qualities the director brings to this picture. So, I mean, you could look at it in his body of work. It's much more romantic, more comedic, perhaps, more sentimental, possibly more sexually charged than Ford's other works. He isn't afraid to push the envelope here sexually. You consider how he has Mary Kate and Father Lonergan speak in Gaelic to disguise the frank dialogue they're having about her married sex life, or when MacHale assumes the newlyweds, broke their bed in a fit of lusty fervor, perhaps, or the famous final shot where Mary Kate whispers something presumably naughty in Sean's ears, causing them to rush back to their cottage. So yeah, and just in terms of the sauciness of the story and the characters and things, this was a little deviation for John Ford.
To some extent, he called it his first love story, which was not really accurate, because he had made Rio Grande 2 years before for Republic Pictures, the company that made The Quiet Man, and he went to Republic where John Wayne was the major star, precisely so he could get them to make The Quiet Man. But Herb Yates, the head of the company, said you first have to make a Western that will be guaranteed moneymaker, because he thought The Quiet Man was an art film that wouldn't make money. But Rio Grande is a very good love story between Wayne and O'Hara, and it's about a couple who were estranged because of what happened during the Civil War, and it's very moving and very adult. And Ford had a lot of great women characters in his films all the way through. It's one of the kind of misapprehensions about him that he was only a male director, a man's director, and there's a whole book on Ford's view of women. I taught a course on Ford's women, and many strong female characters in his films, very complex people, but it is more romantic than his most of his films, and it is very, very sexy. He also called it the sexiest film ever made in kind of a loose moment. It is quite sexy. There's a very erotic scene later. You alluded to the second kiss in the graveyard when it's raining. And there's a very long take for about a minute as they're embracing in a 2-shot, and the rain is soaking his skin, his shirt, and you see kind of his bare skin. In those days you couldn't show the bare skin of women, but you could, if the men had some bare skin, it made it kind of erotic by suggestion. But it's very beautiful, and there's this sense of eternity to it that Ford was alluding in that scene to, how they're contemplating that they're going to have a long life together, and this sort of cements their relationship even more than the wedding. It's a beautiful scene. So Ford was exploring eroticism more than usually. He made Mogambo after that, which is also very erotic. So he was testing things that he hadn't done as much on before, as any artist will. He was going beyond certain boundaries that he hadn't explored, and so it is a deviation to some extent, but it's not. It doesn't come out of nowhere in Ford,
True, yeah, and likewise, this is a bit of a departure for John Wayne in terms of how his character and performance are different, perhaps, from his other movies. We expect the type of dominating, strong, wisecracking, rugged, cynical character maybe we've seen in other films like The Searchers, Red River, Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Rio Bravo, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, classic Duke characters. Instead, he shows shades of quietude, of reserved tenderness, politeness, wistfulness here. We're not used to that per se.
Yeah.
And although we ultimately get, the bare knuckle manliness, macho swagger we expect from a Wayne character by the last act of this story, most of the Sean Thornton we see is kind of a happy-go-lucky sort who fancies a simple life of peace in a bucolic setting, a man who refuses to fight to get what he wants, even though he could easily throw his weight around if he so chose.
Yeah, and that's, Wayne said he felt uncomfortable in it, just like he did in Liberty Valance, because he felt he didn't have enough to do. Ford's sensibilities were a lot finer than Wayne's, but when they worked together, Ford used Wayne in various good ways. But Wayne said in The Quiet Man, he was standing around a lot, didn't have a lot to do, and there are all these colorful characters, having stealing scenes and things. But that is what's good about his performance. He's contemplative. He's sensitive. He's amused by what's going on. He's moody. He's depressed to some extent. He's holding back. He really doesn't want to fight because he says, I can't fight unless I'm mad enough to kill a man. And he admits that he went in the ring to kill that man. And it's a very candid scene. He confesses to the Protestant minister. He's the only person he can be frank with because he's also an outsider in the town. But you have a great sympathy for this man. But when he does fight McLaughlin, it's not, it's macho in the sense he's brawling and all that, and he's very big and strong. But so is McLaughlin was a giant. He was 6'6", and he was a huge man, but he was an old man. But it's a comical brawl. It's not like really trying to hurt each other.
Correct.
And, everybody in the town understands it. It's a ritualistic thing. But she sets it up. But Wayne is he's very good at. He once said, "I'm not an actor. I'm a reactor." But reacting is a lot of what screen acting is about. Is kind of just looking and being quiet and letting the director cut to something to show you what they're thinking about. And Wayne is terrific at that kind of thing, and it's a fine performance all the way around. It is a bit different from the brawling Wayne you might expect.
Yeah, I think this is one of Wayne's finest performances, in my opinion. I'm not the biggest fan of him as a thespian, but he does stand out in a handful of his pictures. He always has great presence, so you can't deny that. I like that it's understated and reserved here. I like that even though he may say he's not given much to do, that's kind of the whole point. He is the quiet man for a reason. And I also think of Wayne a little differently after watching this and doing a little research. I don't necessarily think of Wayne as an Irish-American actor before The Quiet Man. I understand he has different roots, different ancestry. He's not 100% Irish, but with his Northern Irish roots and his chiseled kind of Celtic facial profile, I think he fits perfectly in with this assemblage of Irish talent and Irish-American talent. And, thankfully, because Thornton immigrates from America, Wayne didn't have to employ an Irish accent, which he may not have been able to pull off consistently. So we're spared that.
Yeah, I think you're very right. And the original story, The Quiet Man, is much more somber and dark than the film. The film is very fun and lighthearted in many ways, but has this undertone of seriousness that is that makes it deeper than just a frothy comedy about Ireland.
Especially with that twist revealed where he does kill the other boxer, and that's why he comes to Ireland. So that comes out of the blue. If you've not seen the movie and it's the first viewing, that's a bit of a shock reveal.
Yeah, although there are a couple of brief allusions to it. The minister, played by Shields, he kind of semi-recognizes him at first because he's a boxing fan. He used to be a boxer himself, and Wayne's character was called Trooper Thorne. He changed his name in America like a lot of people do. And it is a shock. And Ford does not film the flashback in any kind of lighthearted way. It's extremely stark and graphic.
Yes.
Shows his face, a big close-up anguished face with flashbulbs flashing as the man is lying dead in the ring. And when he comes back from it, he's really disturbed. And so it is it takes it very seriously. And I think, I mean, the best comedies it could be dramas, and this film is partly a drama.
Mm-hmm. Just in terms of the compositions, the framing, the kind of stark lighting style and so forth. I was reading that it did influence Martin Scorsese in Raging Bull and some of those boxing sequences, he admitted. Can you name any other films or filmmakers that might have been influenced by The Quiet Man? Did we see any works that might have drawn inspiration afterward?
Well, you mentioned Steven Spielberg did that wonderful tribute to him in E.T., where he's intercutting E.T. watching the kissing scene, and it's part of the plot, and it's and E.T. is an outsider, just like John Wayne is an outsider, and almost there's so many filmmakers who worship Ford. I have a long list in my book. I mean, Kurosawa, Ingmar Bergman. Sidney Lumet said, if there's one thing in our business that's true, it's that everything we do was done first by John Ford. So directors recognize that.
I want to finish the thought here about other films or filmmakers that might have been influenced by The Quiet Man. Now, there isn't a lot that has come up in my cursory research here, and of course, you would know more than me. We did cite Raging Bull and E.T. I'd never seen this movie, but Sergio Leone's Duck, You Sucker was supposedly inspired by The Quiet Man, at least the scenes in that film depicting Ireland. Had you seen that movie?
Actually, I have not, and Peter Bogdanovich was supposed to direct that originally, but I have not seen that. There is a film called Innisfree, which is the name of the town in The Quiet Man, and a Spanish director made a very interesting semi-documentary, semi-story film that deals with some of the bit part actors in The Quiet Man, and it's an interesting film. It's very, very hard to get. There's a film that is very much inspired by The Quiet Man, but is different, The Field. It's a terrific film with Richard Harris playing a cantankerous Irish guy who won't sell his field. But the field land, to quote Gone with the Wind, Gerald O'Hara says, land is the only thing that matters.
You're not making any more of it, right? So there are 3 other modern movies that seem to riff on themes and situations in The Quiet Man. I've not seen any of these. Maybe you have. One is called Lutera. Another is Before Snowfall. Those are both from 2013, and there's a more critically derided film from 2020 called Wild Mountain Time. Had you seen any of these?
Jeez, no, I have not seen those.
Okay, well, maybe they pique your interest. They have mine. I just got to find time to get around to them, but interesting there. So, Joe, let's pivot here. Let's talk a bit about themes, messages, morals, or symbols, for that matter, explored in The Quiet Man. What do you see as a theme here?
It's partly about respect by men and women for each other's customs. I was just watching George Cukor's Pat and Mike, which was made the same year, and it's a similar kind of thing, and 5050, as Tracy puts it, you have to kind of respect the other person and compromise to some extent. And she has to understand his American ways, as Barry Fitzgerald tells her, and then he has to understand her Irish ways. And as the Protestant minister says, well, it's a good custom. It really is. He tries to explain the dowry to Sean. And I've talked to American viewers who think she's, one guy said she's pig-headed, which is mean, I mean, she's not pig-headed. The dowry is very important to her. She says the 300 years of happy dreaming in these
That's right.
possessions of hers, and they mean a lot to her, and that's a custom we don't have in America. And Ford believes that some of the customs that we left behind in other countries are better. In foreign countries, often they have arranged marriages, or the whole community in The Quiet Man gets involved in the marriage, and that's makes Sean uncomfortable. Everybody knows his private matters, but it is a communal thing. Marriage is a communal thing. It's the passing on of tradition and culture and family, and they may be right to be suspicious of an American. But Ford's film is a comedy because it has a happy ending, and it celebrates the union. Romantic comedies often, like in Shakespeare, end with marriages and the whole community coming together. It's about the community accepting Sean, and even his antagonist, Red Will Danaher. They become friends at the end, and they stagger home drunk, and they're singing to each other. And Howard Hawks once said to me, he said, "You ever heard Duke sing? He's really bad." And he sings. He's singing "The Wild Colonial Boy" with Victor McLaglen as they stagger home, and Maureen O'Hara's just really happy to have them both home, even though they're drunk, and because everybody's in harmony at the end. And it's "The Wild Colonial Boy" is a song about an exile. Ford uses music very well and very knowledgeably, and it's about somebody who had to be expelled from Ireland as a criminal and go to Australia.
Fascinating, yeah. Yeah, so as far as themes, I think we can agree on some of these. We can't deny a major message of The Quiet Man is this clash between old world versus new world cultures. Mm-hmm. In an interview, Martin Scorsese said that you need to understand the nature of tribal life and what it means to be in a clan to really comprehend the behavior of the characters in this film, and I would agree. Healing and redemption stand out as well to me. It's called The Quiet Man partially because Sean doesn't want to talk about his, tragic troubles in America that brought him to Ireland, and because he refuses to fight Danaher. So Sean must overcome this fear of fighting and possibly killing someone else. And to do this, he must stop assuming that Mary-Kate is driven by materialistic motivations and finally embrace the Irish customs he has resisted. You talked about this a moment ago. Power and equality are undeniable themes as well. Sean and Mary-Kate each want to be seen as equals by the other. And I really like that interview you shared with me. This is with Stanford professor Ruth O'Hara, and she said to you that I think a significant theme of the movie is power and who has power. It's about power in the ring, about power within the relationship of Sean and Mary-Kate, power within the relationship of Mary-Kate and her brother, and the relationship of power with land and power with money. That really resonated with me, what she was talking about there. Nostalgia for an imagined or an idealized past is also kind of on display in The Quiet Man. Sean is born in Innisfree, as you said, but he lived most of his life in America. Now he wants to return to this idyllic land of his birthplace, a place he calls heaven. But while the land's natural beauty seems to meet his expectations, he isn't prepared for the culture shock he will experience after meeting some of the townsfolk, learning of their customs and traditions. So there's a bit of a looking at things through rose-colored glasses. You talked about, in your writings on the movie, the importance of family and community, the sense of exile, the tension between compulsive wandering and the need for home, the melancholy sense of the transient nature of human existence and worldly institutions. I thought you really hit it on the head with a lot of those points. And lastly, I just want to bring this up. I want to see what your thoughts are here, because I was paying more attention to this on the most recent rewatch of The Quiet Man, and some of the research I gathered seems to bear this out. It seems like colors play a thematic role in this story, Joe. Green and red, maybe they symbolize something like carnal passion, while blues possibly represent, tradition, protocol, customs. There's a theory here that may have some weight. I'm going to read you something. This is by Tim Brayton. He's with Alternate Ending, a blogger who's widely read on the internet. He said, blue is the color of domestic interiors. Blue is the color of siblings Mary-Kate Danaher and Red Will Danaher. Blue is the color of sense, contrasted with the outside and with green. What's the most distinctive high-impact moment of blue in this whole movie? It's the moment when Sean first spots Mary-Kate tending her brother's sheep. She's still in blue, and she's an aberrant element in that green, yellow, and white landscape. In this shot, even the sky is yellow to make O'Hara pop out all the more. She's eye-catching and special, but the colors mark her out as a disruption as much as an enticement. Blue is what Sean wants, but blue is also all the things he is not. Blue is the things he didn't come to Ireland for, like peace, calm, and the land. And the rest of the film will find him moving toward and away from blue, trying to find the way to fit in with his own more neutral color palette. Blue eventually wins, of course, because the hearth and home always win in Ford.
Well, those are a lot of good observations.
The Quiet Man has undergone reappraisal by some, modern critics, fans, contemporary viewers, and so forth, and everybody has a right to their opinion, but some things may not have dated as well. Is this film too problematic or dated, perhaps, in its gender politics to be relevant or appreciated by modern audiences? How can you convince younger viewers to give it a chance?
Well, just go back quickly to, you mentioned Ruth O'Hara, and I had that debate on The Quiet Man. She's my wife, and she's from Ireland, and she's now an associate dean at Stanford. And we met in 1985 when she came from Ireland. And I was like Sean Thornton. I had this romantic view of Ireland. I thought, oh, a beautiful Irish woman. And she turned out to be very feisty and very strong and independent, which I like, and very intelligent and all these things. But she didn't have this romantic view of Ireland that I had. And so it's kind of a little like The Quiet Man. I thought it'd be fun to have a debate with her for the 50th anniversary of The Quiet Man in Irish America. I used to be their film writer. And it's in my book, Two Cheers for Hollywood, a collection of my short pieces. And it was a fun debate. But the thing that struck me at the time, too, was she didn't like The Quiet Man very much. And at that time, it was my favorite Ford film. She's come around somewhat to my view, and I appreciate her view. She actually thought the sexual politics, gender politics were very accurate and fine, and nothing wrong with them. She thought there was a certain amount of stereotyping that she didn't like. You know, Ruth is very sensitive to that. The Irish are very sensitive to how they're portrayed, with good reason. And so she and I debated that, but I do believe the issue of stereotypes is more complicated. I wrote a piece on Ford's Irishness, that Ford saw people generally in their social context, perhaps first of all, and then as people. And he was not one who ignored people's social backgrounds. You know, today it's considered maybe, you know, when you ask somebody where you're from or what's your background, sometimes people get offended, you know. But Ford always wanted to know that kind of thing. When I met him, he wanted to know, you know, what village my ancestors came from, and I had to admit I didn't know, and he was irritated at me for being so stupid. But you know, in other words, that kind of social context was extremely important to Ford, especially in a social comedy like this one. And so she thought the gender politics were very accurate. And when Ford gave Frank Nugent the task of writing the script, one of the books he gave him to read was one from about 1940 on spousal abuse in the west of Ireland. There's a wonderful movie called The Ballroom of Romance, which is an Irish film, which is, you know, somewhat related to these themes. It's about a single woman who goes to one of these sad country dances where, you know, people have trouble relating to each other. A lot of Irish men are kind of backward sexually, or at least were in that period. It's changed a lot over the years, but the west of Ireland is where Ford's family came from. And the Celtic revival of the early 1900s put the west of Ireland forward as the true Ireland. Dublin is the seat of the British Empire, and Ford actually kind of had contempt for Dublin people. He liked west of Ireland people, and we don't necessarily know that or appreciate that in America, but the West is our totem, you know, of the true America. And is the clash between cities and the country is a big theme in 20th century American literature and films. So anyway, but the people are very conscious of their roles in the community, which to Ford was not a small thing. It's very important to be the matchmaker, or the widow who owns property, or the Protestant minister, or the Catholic priest. All these roles are worthy of respect, and people play up their stereotypical traits. Barry Fitzgerald has a field day. He's such a great actor, and this is such a wonderful part. One of my favorite characters.
I think he steals every scene he's in.
Oh, he's just sublime. He's always a great actor, but he could do anything, and he's it's all tongue in cheek, you know. I mean, and he's playing a role of the town drunk and the town matchmaker and the town busybody
and the town bookie and
yeah, he's got all these functions, and everybody's aware of it. And there's a kind of a self-consciousness the Irish have about their heritage. Ruth objected to the amount of drinking in the film, and there is a fair amount, but I pointed out that most of the people in the film don't drink, you know. The only people who drink are Wayne, and McLaughlin is portrayed as a drunk, and Barry Fitzgerald's a drunk, but the rest of them are pretty abstemious. And if you go to Ireland, you find out about half the people there are teetotalers, actually, and you don't think of that too much. The two stereotypes you hear of Irish people are they drink a lot and they fight.
Yep.
And superficially, The Quiet Man represents that, but there's a lot more to Ireland than that.
Certainly. What would you say to those listeners out there who may be quick to dismiss this as horribly dated, misogynistic, perhaps, you know, really archaic in its gender politics?
Well, you have to kind of put films in context for people, because presentism is what is a problem with a lot of culture today. We look at everything through the prism of 2022 as if we are all perfect and we all understand race and gender, and it's ridiculous because we're in a terribly divisive, horribly prejudicial environment. So the idea that we're perfect is absurd and insane. People will look back at us in 10, 20 years and think we're a bunch of morons, you know. And so to look back at 52 and say this film is caveman behavior by Sean dragging her through the fields is what people sometimes, that's all they see in the film. But as I mentioned, Brandy French, who is a psychologist and film critic and actress, she saw the rebellion and the subversion by Mary Kate, who influences Sean and undercuts his sort of simplistic ideas of masculinity. And so the film really questions those roles, and it comes up with a kind of a 5-0-5-0 relationship between them, a equality of relationship. And it's sort of a blending the best of both cultures, I think, in the film. But I try to put the film in context without telling them exactly what to think. But as I mentioned, I think the key thing that people miss who don't like The Quiet Man is that Mary Kate sets up the whole big climax.
Now, this is crucial because I try to, convince people of this as well. And it's a little bit difficult to get your head around. She orchestrates this entire thing, does she not?
Yeah.
She wants Sean to come storming back and claim her at the train station like a caveman, perhaps. She wants him to fight her brother for her honor and to prove that he's willing to fight for her, does she not? And while it's difficult for modern audiences to watch, her being roughly handled by Sean, being dragged and pushed and kicked and manhandled, isn't she secretly delighted that he's exerting what she sees as his manly authority here? Isn't she actually proud that he's demonstrating very publicly to the townspeople that he's a man who won't be bullied by his wife or his brother-in-law?
Yeah, well, and that he fights for his wife's, independence and but also for their marriage, and that he's not a weak person who just backs away from a fight, which is what he seems to most people. And there's a shot of Barry Fitzgerald looking very sad when he thinks Sean is backing away from Victor McLaglen, the town bully. And but that is what she wants. This it's a theatrical demonstration. It's a ritual. Ford's films are full of rituals, cultural rituals. Fighting is a ritual, and also this dragging home the bride was a custom of Ireland in the Middle Ages, that you had to go to the opposite clan and literally take the wife and drag her away from the people. It was seen as, it wasn't violent. It was seen as just a good demonstration of your love and your will to have a wife, and then to but back in those days maybe people weren't free to choose partners. But she's also a modern woman. She's independent. She hasn't been married before. She could have been married, and she's probably willing to be unmarried if she doesn't find the right man. So that's modern, but she wants this custom to be fulfilled. And I remember when Scorsese was interviewed and somebody quoted that dragging home the bride, he said, wow, that's really interesting, that culture. I didn't know about that history, but Ford knew about those things, and the people in the town all know that. But it's all very humorous. But I think one thing that gets people a little upset is when Ford and Wayne take a certain amount of relish in dragging her through the fields. But most of the time, she's really delighted by it. And there's a big smile on her face where Wayne confronts her brother. She walks away and she says, I'm going to go and make the meal for you, and she has a big smile. She walks past the camera with a grin, and so she's got what she wants, a demonstration of his love. He stands up for her, and he's not being an American. He's being like an Irish man who's going to adhere to the customs of the town. And they all kind of know the customs are antiquated and old-fashioned, but they have a meaning, and Ford was big on tradition. He understood the reasons these customs exist. But it's about pride and independence on her part. And Sean comes to realize that with the help of the Protestant minister, who kind of explains the mores of the town. And so that's kind of what the audience has to get that. But a lot of people don't get that, and they just see John Wayne. There's a lot of people who react to John Wayne in a simplistic way. I think he's my favorite film actor, and he's given many fine performances of great nuance.
Let's go back here for a second. If you just look at the evidence in the movie in terms of the point and counterpoint here, on one hand, yes, she allows herself to be dragged by Sean in a visibly humiliating way. I understand there's some of this she can't control. He's stronger than her. But this is what she has, like you said, set into motion. Even though she's orchestrated this entire charade and she wants Sean to exert his caveman-like dominance in public and fight her brother, this is still a bit uncomfortable. We see Sean spank her as she walks away. Like other Irish women at this time, Mary-Kate also requires her family's blessing and her dowry for the marriage to proceed. But again, 2022 viewers, they may not have this proper context or knowledge. You recall, too, how a woman in the crowd says to Sean, "Here's a good stick to beat the lovely lady." Now, that's a funny line, but in 2022, that could really rub a lot of viewers the wrong way. And then you recall how Father Lonergan ostensibly chastises Mary-Kate for not fulfilling her wifely duties in the bedroom. So there's a lot of problematic issues here. But on the other hand, Joe, you think about how Mary-Kate stands up to men, both verbally and physically. She doesn't act subserviently to Sean, for the most part. We see her slap his face. We see her take swings at him. We see her scold Sean. Mary-Kate also goes toe-to-toe with her brother during arguments, throwing a rag in his face, for example. And you recall also how Sean lets her drive the horse and buggy, which to me further suggests that she's a strong woman worthy of respect in a world dominated by men. And additionally, she appears to be a very sexually empowered female for 1952. She refuses Sean his assumed conjugal rights. It's suggested in the final shot that she whispers something adult in his ear that prompts him to follow her into the house, perhaps into the bedroom. She's playful. She's adventurous, as proven when she takes off her stockings and she runs through the water. In the two kissing scenes between Sean and Mary-Kate, Sean instigates the first kiss, yes, but she instigates the second kiss. First he kisses her, then she slaps him, but later she comes back to pull him toward her and kiss him again. Their marriage can be viewed as an equal partnership, I think, in that her insistence on the dowry and her refusal to grant intimacy, it gives her power. Sean kicks in the bedroom door that she locks. But unlike, let's say, Gone with the Wind, where Rhett Butler has his way with a, non-consensual Scarlet, he spends the night in his sleeping bag. So it is interesting. The broken bed scene, the extended fight scene, they're symbolic of Sean trying to reclaim his honor. They're meant to be scenes of triumph and humor. Today, they can be viewed as a man dominating or abusing his wife if you so choose to look at it that way. I can understand the counterpoint, and it is problematic to some people. And the public dragging sequence, it's rough for some to swallow today. But as you said, you have to think about it. It's depicted comically. You note how polite the gathering crowd is to both Mary-Kate and Sean. And you bear in mind, Joe, you know this, I'm sure you do, The Quiet Man is loosely based on Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Now, that's a story that thematically boils down to a man, Petruchio, taming a violent-tempered woman, Catherine, and coercing her into the traditionally compliant and dutiful role of a wife, so to speak. And as in the Bard's play, Mary-Kate eventually submits to, yes, patriarchal forces for the 1950s, or in this case, 20s, I guess if it's set then. Although this has much more to do with Irish mores and conventions of the early 20th century. This is Rutgers University professor William C. Dowling. He wrote this: Mary-Kate is, like Shakespeare's Kate, a barely controlled elemental force, and a central question posed by The Quiet Man is why she then chooses to submit herself to custom or tradition. The Quiet Man will resolve this problem by giving primary importance to a relation between marriage and property that was a survival from early or pre-Christian Irish law, so long as Mary-Kate has married a husband in American terms, that is to say, as a union of two isolated or unattached persons operating in a social void. She will remain a woman in exile from her own community, an unintegrated figure cut off from communal life and values. She will also remain, in terms of ancient Irish law and custom, an unequal partner in her own marriage. The villagers of Innisfree understand, as does Mary-Kate Danaher herself, that the dragging scene is not some gratuitous display of male violence, but a ritual of community meant to put right the violated kinship relations that Sean Thornton, with his American understanding of property and marriage, has until this moment utterly failed to grasp. The Donnybrook sequence expresses in nearly pure terms a standard theme in Ford's films, the idea that the communal energies released in innocent or lucid violence have a power to redeem community, purging old antagonisms and widening the circle of social acceptance to include even those previously banished to or left on the outside. Their marriage can be made real within its community only through a cleansing ritual of innocent or lucid violence. Interesting thoughts there from William Dowling.
I think that the film is very complex and both characters are admirable, and Ford is giving equal respect to both views. I think that, see, in 2022, I think there's a vast ignorance of history and culture. That's one of the problems we have with cancel culture and kind of ignorance of classic films and people's unwillingness even to look at films made before they were born or whatever. They don't have a lot of understanding or respect for history or culture, whereas Ford is steeped in that. And this film demonstrates this respect through the behavior of all the people around her. And she is a woman caught, as Brandy French puts it, on the brink of revolt. You know, she's a domestic servant, and she complains about that, and she's angry about that. And but that's the role that women had in that society. And Ireland was, you know, one reason my wife left Ireland was women's roles, even in the 80s, were circumscribed. It's changed an awful lot as the church has lost its influence, and the modern world has changed a lot of mores. But back in the 50s or in the 20s, whenever the film takes place, the woman didn't have a lot of options between being a domestic servant to her tyrannical brother, who she really wants to get away from, but she doesn't know how to do it. Sean offers her an escape, and she does have independence at the end with the man, but it's a celebration of marriage, like Shakespeare's romantic comedy. Romantic comedies generally end with the union of a couple, and this film, it has a very rich understanding of the whole cultural setting. And I think that that's one of the things that I enjoy Ford. One reason, you know, in the study of Ford, which I've been doing for more than 50 years, you wind up reading a lot of history and cultural books, and you understand more about where the culture comes from, and like his great knowledge of music and his knowledge of the history and culture of each community he deals with. And so that if you pay attention to it and are open to it, it's a much richer film than you know, simple thing of somebody dragging somebody around. But that's all that some people want to see, because, you know, a lot of simplistic thinking out there, unfortunately. But when you study classic films like you do, and you've made so many good comments here of your own, and also quoting other people, that there's so much going on in films made by a great director like Ford and a great writer like Frank Nugent and Maurice Walsh, who really, if you want to look at the film from John Wayne's point of view, it is about the warrior's return and the warrior healing himself from the sin of killing and battle, and how do you get over that? And I mean, I don't believe in the concept of closure, which a lot of people like to think of, because you never get over trauma completely. You learn to live with it, which is what he learns to do.
Right.
And what he's doing, he doesn't want to really have a serious fight with somebody, because he tells the minister, I have to be mad enough to kill somebody to go back into the ring. He's not trying to kill McLaughlin. It's just it's a sham. It's fun. It's a ritual, and so it's a jolly celebration of life at the end of the film, and everybody gets sort of what they want.
That's right.
And everybody learns a lesson to some extent too, which is part of what happens in social comedies. And Wayne has to appreciate the local customs and not dismiss them in his myopic American way that a lot of American viewers feel.
So this is a 70th birthday celebration, Joe. It's always customary to give presents on birthdays, except it's the fans who continue to get the gifts. What is The Quiet Man's greatest gift to viewers?
Gee, there's so many great things about it. The pictorial beauty is just ravishing. You know, if you want to look at a beautiful work of art, it is one of the most beautifully photographed films. But Ford always put the camera in the right place, and there's a kind of a classic beauty to all his compositions. But the cameramen, Hoke and Stout, really did a magnificent job on the film. But also, if you care about cultural differences and Americans abroad and broadening our horizons, it's a film that really repays study, and also to study how Ford can take what could be considered stereotypes and make something very real of them. Barry Fitzgerald's character seems like a very real person to me. I mean, he's one of my three favorite characters in movies, I'd say. The other two are Sterling Hayden in Dr. Strangelove, and Joseph Cotton in Citizen Kane.
That's a good list, Joe.
Yeah, they're very funny characters for one thing. It's such a funny film, but the humor comes from serious underpinnings too. Those some of the gifts that the film gives us.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would add this. I think the film's greatest gift for me is its ability to evoke a sense of mystique and wonder and reverence and, for that matter, longing for Ireland, a country that many American viewers may not have visited, but likely want to after screening The Quiet Man. And granted, this is a fairy tale vision of the Emerald Isle that can resurrect, groan-inducing stereotypes, if you see it that way, and maybe endorse a dated vision of gender politics that is no longer tolerated by some audiences today. Yes, the film has problematic scenes, and yes, the film has, difficult, problematic personalities who perhaps exude a toxic brand of masculinity in the 21st century. But put in a proper historical and cinematic context, and considering how empowered the character of Mary Kate truly is in this tale, I contend that The Quiet Man's worthy virtues, its captivating characters and entertaining attributes, they outshine these and other outmoded elements. And possibly its finest facet is its intrinsic Irishness, the fact that it was proudly made by Irish and Irish-American artists, was shot on location primarily in Ireland, and it boasts a soundtrack filled with a wide assortment of Irish musical standards and songs. And lastly, ruminate on this. There are countless Christmas movies. There are innumerable horror films watched around Halloween. But otherwise, no other holiday on the calendar has a film that has become essential viewing as a yearly tradition as The Quiet Man is to St. Patrick's Day. And to me, that explains a lot about the longevity of and love for this movie. Despite its flaws and, yes, its dated dynamics, enjoying and appreciating The Quiet Man in 2022, it doesn't make you a bad person, nor does it mean you condone or approve of the actions or behaviors of the characters. This film was crafted with care, with passion, and a desire to entertain, and no one involved had a bad word to say about it in any interviews that I read anyway. I think a second greatest gift, real quickly, in my book here, is that The Quiet Man features Maureen O'Hara's greatest screen performance and most memorable character. To her Mary Kate, it leaves an indelible impression of a multifaceted woman of agency who wields intelligence, physical strength, steadfast determination, and stunning beauty. She renders a range of emotions in this role, demonstrating, softness and warmth, as well as intimidating fury and feistiness. And make no mistake, Miss O'Hara, as you well know, was a champion of this film right up to her death, defending it in interviews and expressing her great pride in participating in this picture.
That's all true. But, when you mention words like problematic or toxic or dated, I think actually those are good things in a way, because those are things that make a film interesting, because problematic, a film is about a problem, it's about a situation. Sean has a problem, Mary Kate has a problem, and how it deals with it is the measure of its artistry. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. But toxic masculinity, there is a critique of that in that film, and there is a feminism in the film, and datedness. I think one of the good things about movies is they're time machines.
Yeah, time capsules for the era in which they were made.
Yeah, you look at a documentary from 1910 of the street of London, it's like going back in time. It's one of the things I love about movies. Any movie, even if it's a theatrical film like this one, very stylized, it shows Ireland in the 50s. Ireland was in transition from more rural to a more industrialized country at that time, and the film sort of captures some of that time of transition. So the time in which a film is made, it's a way of learning about the past, which we should really care about. And so, but I think you have to know history, and the history of film is part of it, to really appreciate a film. A lot of audiences today, they will not see a film if it was made before they were born, or even before, 6 months ago.
Total shame. I mean, they're really missing out. They're not giving it a proper chance, and they're not keeping an open mind. How can those people walk into a museum and possibly, exert the same level of reverence and respect for something, or appreciation?
You have to know what they're painting and what it stems from, and what kind of culture produced these works, and why it's done in a certain way, and what they're representing, and how it idealizes something or criticizes it.
Hear, hear, sir. I second those sentiments absolutely. So, Joe, what do you have in the works that you'd like listeners to know about?
I recently did 4 books that all came to fruition around the same time. I did a critical study called Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge, which came out in October from Columbia University Press. I spent years on that. Then I did a book called Political Truth, the media and the assassination of President Kennedy, which was another long-term project, which I'm very proud of.
Wow.
I've been studying that subject for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I did an updated edition of my book, Whatever Happened to Orson Welles, A Portrait of an Independent Career. I brought it up to date in January from University Press of Kentucky. And then I did a short critical study of the Coen brothers called The Whole Darn Human Comedy, Life According to the Coen Brothers.
What a great title that is.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a phrase from Sam Elliott and Big Lebowski, The Whole Darn Human Comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Anthem Press in England. So I did 4 books.
Wow, you have been busy since I last talked to you.
Yeah, this is the busiest time in my life, and I've been taking a bit of a breather and thinking about what I'm going to do next. I've been talking about these books, which is part of what you do. It's kind of, they let you out after putting you in a cell for years. They let you out for a few months to talk about them. That's part of
Right.
That's the reward. The fun part is talking to guys like you.
I get the bigger reward because I get to talk to guys like you. So, wow, this was a real treat, Joe, and I had a wonderful time talking at length with you about The Quiet Man, about John Ford, and all the players and principals involved. So thanks again for your time, and we wish you a happy rest of the summer. You got anything else planned here? Are there classes coming in the fall?
Well, I'm teaching a course on Ford, which will center on the man who shed Liberty Valance. I teach courses on writing about cinema, and I've decided to focus on one film at a time, which I've always wanted to do. I did a course that focused on The Searchers, and I had them read the novel and see the film and write about it.
So you do courses on one complete movie,
yeah,
not just several movies sometimes.
This is new for me, but I know other professors have done this, so I've always wanted to. And I'm also doing one this fall on The Other Side of the Wind, the Orson Welles film that I'm an actor in. And I spent 5 years working on that as an actor and many years trying to get it finished, and I was a consultant on the completion. So that's a very rich, complex film, and we're going to study that.
Wow.
But it's really good to focus on one complicated film that has a lot of facets, and then you can learn how to write about it.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, Eric. It was really good talking to you as always.
Thanks, Joe. Great stuff from Mr. McBride, as always. A tip of the cap to Joe for spending time with us and sharing his thoughts and expertise on one of his favorite films. Okay, I knew if I was going to slate The Quiet Man for anniversary honors, I would also need to pick an apple directly from the tree, as they say. Or, in this case, a native expert who could give me the inside scoop on how this film is regarded in Ireland. So I was thrilled when Des MacHale agreed to come on our podcast. He's up next, but be aware that the audio of our interview, it has some minor issues. So my apologies about that. Still, it shouldn't detract from a fascinating conversation I had with Des that I'm proud to present to you now. Stepping up to the Cineversary microphone next is Des MacHale, Emeritus Professor of Mathematics at University College Cork in Ireland, who has written several books on this month's film, including The Complete Guide to the Quiet Man, Picture the Quiet Man, an illustrated celebration, and most recently, A Quiet Man Miscellany. Des, our gratitude for reserving time to chat with us, and hey, welcome to Cineversary.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure, sir. And I know you've been a champion of this movie for so long, and it must be a personal favorite. So yeah, tell us about your relationship with The Quiet Man and why you love this film so much.
Well, I was born in Castlebar in County Mayo in the west of Ireland in 1946, and The Quiet Man was released in 1952. So I was only 6 years of age at the time. So I don't really remember very much of what was going on, but I do remember that there was great excitement among local people that there was a movie being made in the vicinity. And people would go from Castlebar to Cong, which is about 30 miles away where the movie was filmed. Every day, groups of people would go and they would meet the stars, and there were all sorts of talk about local girls fancying John Wayne. And, there was tremendous excitement there. And it became something very, very important to the area, because the area would be a fairly remote rural area and wouldn't have had appeared on screen or in television very much at the time. And all of a sudden it was on the map. And The Quiet Man was the very first feature movie made in colour in the west of Ireland. And largely it was picked up as something to show the beautiful scenery. I mean, one of the producers complained, it's too green. But I mean, the west of Ireland was actually that green, and people couldn't believe that. So it became a showpiece for Irish tourism, and it still is. After 70 years, you get people from all over the world coming to the west of Ireland just to see the scenes and the locations where this movie was made. The year it was released, I was on holiday with my parents in a little village in Sligo at the seaside called Enniscrone, and The Quiet Man movie was being shown. So we all went to see it. It was very primitive. It was a 16 millimeter showing, and just a big white sheet, a big bed sheet up on the wall of a local little cinema. And we went every night for 5 nights because we thought this movie was absolutely so wonderful. Now, I was only 6 years of age at the time, but I mean, it leaves a lasting impression in my memory. And of course, I fell in love with Maureen O'Hara. I mean, who wouldn't, with that lovely red hair and all that color?
Absolutely.
And I just loved the movie right from the very beginning.
So, yeah, why did you choose to write several books on this film? And what were some interesting things you learned in researching and writing about The Quiet Man that you'd like to share, Des?
Well, almost nothing had been written about The Quiet Man. I mean, everybody liked the movie, went to see the movie, but there was no commentary about it. And in fact, at the time, there were very few movie books. And I mean, we went as far as to having a full conference in Galway about The Quiet Man. I think it was the first movie ever to have a complete conference devoted to itself. And I think my book was probably the first book devoted to a movie. You know, I think really it's for the record. So we would record all these things and they would be known to stop discussion, to start discussion. And it was a way of expressing our love for the actual movie. And you meet people from all over the world. I've met people from France, from Germany, from Japan, from Great Britain, Northern Ireland, the United States especially. Americans actually come to the west of Ireland just to see the locations of The Quiet Man.
So I was going to say, Des, of any movie ever filmed or set in Ireland, I would say this is probably the one film that most people come to Ireland because of, correct?
Absolutely. And in surveys that they've done, the Irish Times did a survey to find the most popular Irish movie of all time, and The Quiet Man won it by a huge amount. I mean, it certainly is the most popular one.
So that begs the question. I'm curious, what was in the running? So if not The Quiet Man, what are some runners up?
There are a few modern ones like The Field,
okay,
and Ryan's Daughter, and very little else really. You know, this was the main one. And I think, I mean, John Ford, when he made The Quiet Man, he thought big. He got wonderful stars. He got John Wayne. Yes. He got Maureen O'Hara. He got Barry Fitzgerald. He got Victor McLaglen. So, and then it was a huge budget for the time as well, and it was in color. That was the main thing.
Technicolor.
I mean, Ireland had been black and white before that.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, and not just color, but Technicolor. Those big
Technicolor as well.
Cameras
Maureen
that they had to
O'Hara
lug
told me
out.
that she lived in Hollywood beside the guy who owned the rights to Technicolor and convinced him that this movie had to be in Technicolor. Because later movies of the type were made in Eastman color, various other things, and nothing had the glory of Technicolor, especially for the green of Ireland and the red of her hair.
And you really see it pop when you see like the modern Blu-ray of The Quiet Man, for example.
I've got the Blu-ray and I've watched it. And on the Blu-ray, you can zoom and you can also see things that you can't see on the other versions, which is wonderful. I've discovered a lot from that. I mean, every time I watch the movie, and I've watched it, I suppose, several hundred times now at this stage,
I'll bet.
I see something new, something I didn't see before.
Of course.
And sometimes I just look at the edge of the screen, not the central characters, but look at the edge of the screen, and you will see something going on that you didn't see before.
That's true. I noticed on this most recent rewatch, I was paying attention to things in the periphery a little bit more.
Yeah.
And you'll see little details. Sometimes you do that just to see if there's a cheat. Like, okay, can I see a telephone pole or something like that?
That's right,
but no, they cover the tracks pretty good. So, Des, I mean, we have to get into this because I'm just dying to understand this better. How was The Quiet Man received by viewers in Ireland back in 1952? I know you were very young, but I'm sure you've done your homework. And then how do modern Irish audiences regard the film today? Is it widely beloved, or is it considered maybe a dated artifact of an archaic time?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because I think a lot depends on this. I remember my own mother, God rest her, loved the film, absolutely loved it, but didn't like the bit where John Wayne dragged Maureen O'Hara through the fields. She thought it was very derogatory, and she said Irishmen don't treat women like that, and it looks very, very bad. So that was the only thing she objected to, really. But almost everybody loved it. And the reason you can prove this is because the box office receipts in Ireland were unbelievable. In Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland and the west of Ireland, people flocked to it. Some people multiple times. Some guys would actually travel around the countryside to little places where the film was being shown and watch it again and again and again, maybe 20, 30 times. They loved it so much. And there's one nice story of a friend of mine called John Gibbons, and he ran a local little movie theater, and he had an arrangement with the people who were sponsoring the film that the fight scene at the end had to be shown at least 3 times every night. So when the fight scene was shown, they showed again, not the whole film, but the fight scene, because the local men liked it so much and liked the fight so much. So, I mean, it was very, very popular and still is popular. I mean, it's shown on St. Patrick's Day here and at Christmas, and is really loved by people. And you rarely hear a person say a bad word against it. Now, a lot of maybe movie critics or a lot of journalists would think that it's derogatory and that it's anti-feminist. And I really disagree with that, because if you look at the plot of The Quiet Man, and I have information now because I've interviewed many of the main characters, and they will tell you what the backstory was.
Okay.
And the story was that when he was dragging her across the fields, that was just to fool her brother, Victor McLaglen. And if he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been fooled, and he wouldn't have handed back the dowry, which was the whole point of the movie, to actually get her dowry then.
And it's also important to remember that Mary Kate kind of orchestrates this whole thing. She's set this whole thing up so that he will storm back and, like a caveman, kind of drag her back and demand the dowry money, right? So she is responsible for kind of putting these pieces on the chessboard in motion.
She's totally in control of the whole thing. And I mean, it may look as if her brother, Victor McLaglen, is in control of her, but she's in control of him. She's in control of the clergy and the men, and she's also in control of John Wayne. He does exactly what she has got to say.
That's right.
And the way she walks down to the crowd at the end shows, look, I've done what I have to do. I've got my money. I've destroyed it. I've put it through in the fire. The money doesn't really matter. I have made my point, and now I'm the controlling person. And I think that's a very important point. We had a conference on The Quiet Man in Galway, and there were a lot of feminist movie analysts there. And I was really wondering how they'd react. They, to a woman, agreed with me. And they said, look, it's all about Maureen O'Hara controlling exactly what's going on.
Right.
So it's only a few journalists that are perpetuating this myth that the movie is anti-woman, that men are in control. It's women who are in control throughout. And it's a very feminist movie. It was great interviewing Maureen O'Hara, because she was able to tell me these things. She told me exactly how John Ford told them how to play the various parts. Okay. And that's good. That's from the horse's mouth. That's not written down. That's the actual information.
The concept of a dowry, I mean, was that still in vogue in 1952? Would viewers in Ireland have understood this concept?
I think they would. First of all, you've got to remember that although the film was released in 1952, it was the 1920s Ireland, just the post-Civil War period that they were trying to portray. So you've got to sort of subtract about 30 years from everything to see what it was actually like. And certainly in the 1920s, women were in such a position that, you know, they were totally dependent on the marriage dowry that they got. They had to bring with them some money, and they had to bring with them some furnishings and dishes and all that type of thing, so they would have independence in their new situation. So the dowry is very important then, and she was right to demand her dowry. Her brother didn't give her a dowry. She deserved that money. It was her money, and she had to fight for it. And the whole film, of course, circles and centers around the notion that she had to have her independence financially and property wise from the men in her life. So the dowry was important, and not so now, and maybe not in the 1950s when the movie was released. That was changing, but in the 1920s, which the film was supposed to represent, that was still very much a part of the social scene.
I want to quote you something that film critic Molly Haskell said about this concept. She said, Mary Kate finally makes Sean understand that it's not the money, but what it stands for. The dowry and furniture are her identity, her independence. So I think this is a notion that may be a little bit elusive to some viewers who don't really understand the context or the concept here. But again, to your point, this is really important. This is not about materialism. It's about her identity.
Absolutely. And she made sure that she would be the person who was ruling the roost, and that she would let other people know how important it was to her. Right. There was also at the background the security of having some money and having some property, because she wouldn't have had any money or property in her original context, just working for her brother. So it was security of material things, as well as security of identity, that she was a married woman now, and that she was in control of what was going on.
And Des, what about the whole notion of her parents are apparently no longer alive, so it's her brother, her surviving kin, who have to approve of the marriage? Would that have been consistent and truthful in the time it is set? I mean, was that consistent with Irish customs?
Yes, I think it would, in that you had to very carefully control who was marrying into your family. And it's still the case in lots of places. If your family did not approve of what was going on, then you couldn't actually get married. And to do that, you would have to be defiant. You would have to leave home. You would maybe have to elope. I'm not saying I agree with it fully, but I'm saying there is
Yeah.
some sense in it.
So that's an example of a custom or more that many still in Ireland abide by, for example. What is an instance in The Quiet Man of a more or custom or tradition that people may have said goodbye to a long time ago? For example, the Queensberry rules.
Well, it's actually hard to find something. People might say drinking has changed, but unfortunately, drinking has not changed in Ireland. We still have a lot of drinking problems among young people. Certainly among fighting, I don't think you would have mass brawls, although you do an odd time. But certainly the Queensberry rules was a local joke because the Marquis of Queensberry would actually have lived very near Cong, set out the first rules for boxing. So Ford put an awful lot of references and in jokes to local things into the film that you've got to analyze it very carefully before you see. But I think, for example, it's been said nobody in The Quiet Man seems to have a job except maybe the clergyman and maybe the doctor or something like that. So I mean, everybody's unemployed, everybody's hanging about. Now we have pretty well full employment in Ireland. So the notion of lazy people just hanging around in pubs drinking all day, that certainly is not the way it was.
Okay. Now, what about the custom of McAleen's role, for example, having a chaperone on the courting ritual? Is that something that is long gone by?
I think that's something that's long gone. But of course, it's again, you just wonder. I think the whole idea was, and it's shown up in the movie, he's there to try and control this courting couple, but they try and get rid of him as quickly as they possibly can, and they ride off on a bicycle together. So I think it was just devised to let them escape from the censure that the society might have for them.
Well, you also see, Des, how McAleen is a bit of an opportunist. I mean, not only is he the town bookie and the town chaperone, but he also wants some compensation for those roles.
Absolutely. Of course, he's an Oscar winner. He'd won an Oscar for Going My Way, and the only person ever to be nominated for 2 different roles for an Oscar.
So we were talking a little bit around the edges there about, let's say, caricatures or stereotypes. So in what ways does The Quiet Man, let's say, celebrate Irish culture and customs? And on the converse, in what ways does the film maybe perpetuate unfortunate stereotypes and myths that native Irish and Irish Americans may resent?
Somebody asked me, what's The Quiet Man about?
Yeah.
And I would say it's about emigration and parting and people being uprooted from their own homesteads. Now, I live in Cork, which is only 200 miles away from where I was born in the west of Ireland, but I feel I'm in exile here. I'm 200 miles away. We mightn't seem much to you, but it seems a lot to us in Ireland. Anybody who is uprooted from the place of their birth and where they grow up, I think feels this terrible feeling of isolation. And that's what John Wayne, Sean Thornton felt. I mean, he grew up in Ireland. He was 12 when he left Ireland. He went to the States. He got a job in Pittsburgh in the steel mills and had a completely different life, a completely different type of environment to what he'd actually grown up with. In the United States, they regarded him as Irish because he come from Ireland. When he came back to Ireland, his own people didn't accept him. They thought he was American. And it's this feeling of isolation that I think pervades the whole film. How does he feel about coming home and not being home at the same time? And people didn't accept him. They had to investigate his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather before they'd even talk to him. And he had a different accent. He had different customs. He had different ways. He talked about how different life was like in America to Ireland, and that he didn't understand the notion that a girl couldn't marry whoever she wanted, that she had to ask her brother's permission first. He couldn't take all those things in. And for the whole movie, he sort of sits around looking bemused at these strange people and their strange ways. And he's supposed to be one of them, but he's not. And I think this is the reason for the worldwide popularity of The Quiet Man, because everybody in every country has probably been uprooted from somewhere else, from the place of birth, from the country of birth, from the type of people that they grew up with. And I think that's why the movie is so popular. You sense that, you feel that all the time. How is he going to fit in? And it takes him a long time to understand. And he probably spent the rest of his life trying to understand what the Irish were like, although he was supposed to be Irish himself.
Yeah, we were talking about stereotypes, cliches, and caricatures. So, yeah, when you think about The Quiet Man, you, for example, think about McAleen, who's almost like this leprechaun-like character who is, the town lush. For that matter, there are a lot of people who, hang around the bar all day and all they do is drink, presumably. Or you think about Mary Kate, who's a fascinating character, very, very unique and distinctive. However, maybe it perpetuates the myth that all Irish lasses are redheaded hotheads or something like that. So what is your take here on, is this film unfortunately perpetuating those myths or stereotypes? And what do Irish people in general think about that today?
Well, I think the Irish people have a very vivid type of imagination, and they know that if something is a drama or a play or a movie, that it's not meant to be taken seriously. It's not meant to be real.
Hmm.
Now, can you think of any situation or any film that portrays reality in any other area? I can't think of one really. It's meant to exaggerate. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be something that people don't take too seriously. And I don't think that anybody looks at The Quiet Man today and takes it seriously and says it's derogatory. It's showing a bad image of Ireland. First of all, it shows the beauty of Ireland, which people appreciate very much indeed. But I don't think anybody really believes that what's going on. And of course, Ford didn't either. John Ford had a good sense of humor. He liked to laugh. He liked people to enjoy themselves. And I don't think any film or any movie or any book for that matter would stand up to that sort of analysis, saying that it's portraying stereotypes. I've been at showings of The Quiet Man. Sometimes they have a showing in the Irish Film Theatre in Dublin, and I go there. And there are a lot of people there who are seeing the movie for the first time. A lot of them young people, a lot of them children. And they just laugh throughout the movie. They think it's very, very funny, and they think it's very, very entertaining. And nobody comes out offended or insulted.
Now, The Quiet Man was not intended, of course, to be a realistic depiction of Ireland, set at this time, like you said, between sometime in the 1920s, let's say. But in what ways is it more like let's say, an Irish tall tale or folk story or fable?
Created a world of its own, and people began to expect that world. And I'm sure being a cowboy wasn't a bit like what portrayed in the cowboy movies, but that's what we like to see, and that's what we like to look at. And I think that, Ford himself had an idealized view of Ireland because he grew up in the United States, he grew up in Maine, and he learned a lot of songs and he learned a lot of folklore from his mother, who was from the Aran Islands, at his mother's knee. And he wanted to portray something of that because that's what he thought people expected. And he came to Ireland and said, and of course, when you're a director and you can control everything, you can make it anything that you like. Remember, it was very popular with the Irish and very popular with people all over the world. The only people who don't seem to like The Quiet Man are a few journalists who sort of just want something to write about. And they're not actually portraying the reality of what people feel. I mean, it was the best-selling video disc in Ireland for many, many years. I mean, people were still buying it, even in the 20th century. Now, remember, also, the original idea for The Quiet Man was to make it into a very serious movie about the IRA and the fight for Irish freedom. And halfway through the editorial process, Ford decided, look, this isn't working. The Irish really aren't a serious people. They're entertaining people. Let's make it a musical comedy. And that's what, or a Western set in Ireland. And that's what it turned out to be. Certainly, if it had been a serious movie with people shooting each other, I don't think it would have had anything like the same popularity.
Right.
Wouldn't have been nearly as good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, they skirt around the edges with some references to the IRA and to a treason, for example. MacHale makes that one quote about that. So if you don't really understand the politics or the history of the context, it might be a little lost on you. But there are a few remnants of the Civil War and the IRA angle and things like that in here if you want to look for it.
Remnants is the correct word. Just the cute little vestiges he left in there just for effect.
You consider that this was intended as John Ford's homage to what he imagined as a happier, simpler time in the life of his ancestors, perhaps. You think about the word Innisfree, and that's derived from the Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats, the poet. And that immediately evokes a poetic, imaginative fancy, if you know anything about that poem.
Yeah.
The romantic scenes, they're highly charged. They influence the surroundings. You recall how the storm pops up out of nowhere, seemingly in response to Sean and Mary Kate's passion and then their torrid feelings. That's not something literal. A storm wouldn't just pop up like that.
No, it wouldn't. And I've made the point in my books that it's not an Irish storm. That's an American storm. I mean, Irish lightning is very different from that.
Right.
I mean, John Wayne in a wet T-shirt must have caused a lot of gaps.
Yes. Very stylized, slightly exaggerated here. I want to read you quickly a quote. This is by Slant magazine reviewer Carson Lund, who was a fan of the film. So this is an example of a journalist who was a champion of it. But he did say that The Quiet Man's most evocative scenes center on the correlation between primal desire and the grandeur of the landscape. Sean embraces Mary Kate in the threshold of a doorway rattled open by a powerful gust. And in a conflict-cleansing brawl in the film's final act, rivers are fallen into, haystacks are churned up, and the bright green grass is tugged from the ground. Implicit in all of this is the notion of the land as a dynamic presence in these characters' lives, not simply ground on which to settle, but a force to be reckoned with, a place where habitation must be earned.
Ford himself said that The Quiet Man is a very erotic film.
Mm.
He said if Ford believed that you could be erotic without showing explicit detail and leave it to the imagination of the audience, which I
Yes.
think is a very, very good principle. But remember one scene when Mary Kate goes to make a confession to the parish priest.
I was just thinking of this. I was going to ask you, what does she say? What are they saying to each other?
It took me a while to translate that because it's quite obscure. But she says she'll make a confession in Irish, in the Irish language, and it's one of the few sentences of Irish in the thing. Maureen O'Hara says, Near lig me ma arcela isteach in a laba a rare on paca a. I didn't let my husband into my bed last night.
Okay.
Is that a sin? You can imagine moviegoers wondering what the hell is she saying. I mean, they wouldn't have there were no subtitles. They wouldn't know what she was saying. And I mean, that was a very much more erotic scene. And especially as well when the bed is broken down when Barry Fitzgerald says impetuous Homeric. I mean, again, he leaves it very much to your imagination. And Ford himself says that he would not put any erotic scene in a film that his own grandchildren would not be capable of looking at.
Let's be honest, though, Des. Also, the truth rests in this was the era of censorship, and he had to skirt around the edges a bit in terms of suggesting more adult kind of situations or language or what have you. So it's kind of a brilliant masterstroke to have her speak to the priest in Gaelic.
I think it
is. Because you get past the censors that way. You don't have to worry about them wanting you to trim that out of your picture.
But it is important that the more explicit you are, the less erotic it is. And Ford understood that leave it to the audience's imagination what is going on or what's going on in their minds, and that'll be a lot more powerful. And you could get away with a lot more in that guise than you could by having explicit sexual scenes.
Yes, and I think that what also accentuates this point is the final shot where you see Mary Kate whisper something perhaps naughty in Sean's ear, and she said she will go to the grave with that secret. She will not divulge what she says to John Wayne there.
That's what she said to me. She said only 3 people know that. I said,
okay.
There's John Ford, who's dead. There's John Wayne, who's dead. And of course, she's dead now too. And I said, would you leave it to me in your will? Would you write on a piece of paper in a sealed envelope so that I could? No, she said, nobody would ever know that. But I have found out what it was. And I am the only person, and I'm not going to divulge it, don't worry.
Okay.
I am the only person on the planet who knows exactly what she said.
Wow. Well, I think we could figure it out in context. I think if we use our imaginations.
Yeah, I can tell you how many words she said. I can tell you what each word was. And what I've done is, I'm a mathematician, as you know, so I have put it into code, into a very, very difficult, almost unbreakable code, which I'll give to anybody who wants. And if they can puzzle out from that code, then they're cleverer than I am.
Interesting.
See the mystery he left.
Yes.
See the wonderful mystery he left from a device. And but Maureen O'Hara, I said to Maureen O'Hara, was it rude? She said it was quite rude. She said, that's all I'll say to you.
I think it's a brilliant way to end the movie. One of the best final shots of any movie I've ever seen, because it just intrigues the imagination. It leaves you feeling happy.
Yeah.
It leaves you feeling very good about their relationship after a tumultuous bulk of the film and the story. And again, it's adult. You can kind of figure out. My wife immediately turned to me. She said, "Oh, she's telling him that she's pregnant." I said, "I don't think so. I don't think so, because they're both kind of skittering off back to the house and probably the bedroom. I don't think so."
You could be right. You could be right.
Yeah. Now, I was reading that the story was inspired by a Celtic myth about an epic war between 2 kingly deities who fought every year for the love of a goddess queen. Is this true?
Well, that's stretching a little bit, but certainly there was the notion that just as we said, when you marry somebody, you're actually entering their family. If there was maybe antagonism between the 2 families, they had to fight it out first and see who was the better man or the better woman before an agreement could be made about the marriage. And that's often given as a reason why they dragged her across the countryside, and the whole community gets involved and follows it. And really what it goes back to is that The Quiet Man is the ultimate family movie. It's all about family. It's all about families amalgamating, whatever. Okay. And I mean, true to form, John Ford actually had loads of family members from different families in the movie.
Yes.
You've got Maureen O'Hara's 2 brothers, James Dilburn and Charles Fitzsimons are there. Frank Ford, and he was John Ford's brother. You had Eddie O'Farna, who was and Ken Curtis was Ford's son-in-law. Then you had Barry Fitzgerald and Arthur Shields, who were 2 brothers. That's Micheline Og and the clergyman. And then you had Victor McLaglen, and his son Arthur McLaglen. It was all family. And Ford said the way to get the best performances out of your actors is know them and have them from the same family, make them your family.
In fact, we see 3 or 4 of John Wayne's children in the movie too.
That's right, of course, yeah. And then, of course, you had the local involvement. I mean, that's very important.
Sure.
They got a load of extras from the villages of Cong and Clifton and Cross and the Neil, all little places surrounding where the film was shot in Galway.
Yes.
And they became absolutely wonderful.
So America and Ireland, they're two opposing worlds to Sean. What does each country represent to him, do you think? And why is it important for viewers to perhaps understand these distinctions?
Well, I think that's a very good point that you're making. Sean comes from a very industrialized society in Pittsburgh. He'd have grown up in an urban area. He'd have heard music maybe and folklore from his mother, but it was about a dream world called Ireland. And of course, if he was upset or things were going badly, he would dream of this country like he wanted to come back. America represented sophistication. You know, if I was in America, I'd just honk and the girl would come running. And Mary Kate says, I'm no girl to come running when honked at.
Right.
You know, the difference, attitude towards courtship and marriage, industrialization, jobs, and Ireland's primitive. But Sean Thornton and John Wayne was meant to portray somebody who was in one way sophisticated, but also innocent, because he would be innocent of the ways of the world. And if you grow up in a certain society, you've got to take into account that not every society may be like yours, and that if you come to a new society, you've got to make adjustments. And he was amazed at the adjustments that he had to make. I think a lot of Americans have that attitude. If they come to another country, they expect the country to be like their own country, and it's not.
Right. The film becomes a kind of comedy of manners as Sean is conflicted by the social mores and the time-honored rituals of Irish courting. We've talked about this. And so the mystery of Innisfree to Sean is summed up in the question, how can his undeniably romantic passion be halted by mere tradition or custom, as exemplified by Red Will's refusal to let his sister marry him? And it's not until Sean can look upon Mary Kate with Irish eyes instead of American eyes will their relationship progress.
I think that's very true. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. If you had to ask me in general, what's the essence of Ireland? Now, maybe I'm not the only person who would think this way, but I think the essence of Ireland is comedy. I think the Irish are not as serious people. They may pretend to be serious in their poetry and the music and things like that, but the taking the mickey or having a go at somebody or fooling them or not, certainly not knowing whether you're being taken seriously or not, and not giving any clue about that is a very important characteristic in Ireland. And I mean, if you think about it, everybody in the cast in The Quiet Man is out to fool Sean Thornton. You know, I mean, nobody tells him the truth. Nobody tells him what's going on. There are all sorts of schemes going on. He expects certain things to happen. They don't happen. Ireland, I think, is, even still, with all its industrial sophistication, still a twilight world where you're not sure what the truth is or not. You're not sure if somebody's having you on or having a go at you. And that Ford spotted that way on in the 1950s, that's the essence of Ireland.
Right.
And that, you know, if somebody comes from a foreign shore, you can easily make a fool of them in as many ways as you want and assert your superiority over them if you want to. And I think that's what we're still famous for. And I think the British found this as well, that in their attempts to sort of conquer Ireland, they never understood the nature of the Irish people, the nature that they are people who are essentially humorous and who could turn vicious, but who were not taking life seriously. I think if you take life seriously in Ireland, you're a fool, because life is not essentially serious. And I think that's the great contribution that the Irish can make to civilization, to show life is not essentially serious. And I think The Quiet Man, that's of the essence of that. It is not a serious movie in the sense of having a huge social message to give, but it's an important movie because it's portraying a people, maybe not precisely how they are, but there's a strong element of that, I think, in every Irish personality. And Ford himself was like that too. I think he was essentially a humorist, very witty. He loved comedy, but of course, Ford could be a very difficult and hard human being as well.
Yes.
This dichotomy, this sort of Jekyll and Hyde characteristic, I think is latent in every Irish person.
So, Des, what is The Quiet Man's greatest gift to viewers?
Very hard to pick out one. Maybe I'll give you several. I'd say the first gift is that it was the first film to show the Irish themselves and other people as well what a beautiful country Ireland is, how green it is, how just lovely it is to look at. It's also universal in the sense that I think the courtship of Sean Thornton and Mary Kate Danaher is something that could be interpreted and understood in any country in the world. It is a classic romance. It's a classic conflict followed by resolution of the conflict. I always compare it to something like a cake, a rich Christmas cake. If you get if you got dozens of lovely ingredients in your cake, and if it's cooked by somebody who really enjoys cooking, you're going to get a masterpiece. And that's what it was. You have the ingredients of the stars, the movie stars, many Oscar winners in there already. I mean, Victor McLaglen, John Wayne. By the way, I'd like to think I was responsible for Maureen O'Hara's honorary Oscar, because every year I wrote to the Academy and I said, look, this wonderful actress never got an Academy Award for the parts that she played during film career. Please give her an honorary award. And one year they wrote to me and said, okay, we'll give it to her this year.
Wow.
And I was so pleased, so delighted to be able to tell her that she was getting an honorary Oscar, because I'd met her, I'd interviewed her, I formed a relationship with her, and she was, even in her 90s, she was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. The geometry of the bone structure of her face was absolutely perfect.
You're right.
She was beautiful.
Yes.
She really was beautiful, even at that age. And that's what real beauty is. That's what the movie means to me. It's something I watch it again. I've watched all 250,000 individual frames of the movie, every single one.
Incredible.
And it's quite incredible to see the level of detail that you get. If you watch every single frame, you see things that you weren't meant to see and that nobody else would actually see.
Spoken like a true mathematician, of course you parse the movie frame by frame, right? I mean, you probably counted each frame and divided it by a certain quotient.
That's right, exactly it. I did that calculation today to make it. And in one frame, a fly lands on Maureen O'Hara's cheek.
I saw that, yes.
See it for just one frame.
That's amazing. Yeah, you've got to pay attention, but it's there. Well, before we do say goodbye, do you have anything in the works that you'd like listeners to know about? For example, is there another book on the horizon?
Maybe, as I say, 4 books maybe is enough, but I would like to do a little booklet maybe showing you all the locations.
Oh, okay.
Because I think a lot of, and maps of them, because that's what Americans seem to come to Ireland
right
for, so maybe mention that. And I did do a book called Ripples in the Quiet Man with all the 200 mistakes that I found in the movie, all the anachronisms, all the bloopers, all the, so that's fun as well. John Ford would have really hated that, anybody finding out little flaws in his work.
He's rolling in his grave, as they say.
I just didn't want people to think that I had rose-colored spectacles that I couldn't see anything. It has some faults.
Course.
I mean, there's a lot of lighting errors, I mean, they did studio shots with the sun showing shadows from 3 different directions, all that type of thing. Wayne's wearing a wedding ring in the first scene of the movie.
Is that right?
Look at his hand when he opens the door of the train. He's not supposed to be married, but he's wearing a wedding ring. So little things like that, just to see how sharp one is.
There you go. It's almost like a Where's Waldo exercise. Try to find the mistakes.
That's right.
That's part of the fun of watching a classic movie, of course. There are going to be some flubs and errors, but I'll be watching next time The Quiet Man, looking for that wedding ring.
Good. So I really enjoyed talking to you, and best of luck with your series. It looks like a very interesting series of podcasts, and I think the fact that you're honoring The Quiet Man is very much appreciated.
Yeah, feelings mutual. I mean, I couldn't think of a better guest here, and fantastic stories and recollections that you shared with us, Des. Thank you so much for sharing them and for spending some quality time with us here on Cineversary.
Thank you.
Talking with Des reminds me I've got to stop procrastinating and finally book that bucket list vacation to Ireland. Cheers to you, Des. We appreciate you appearing on Cineversary. Like what you hear on Cineversary? We'd love to get your feedback. Whether you want to nominate a movie for a future anniversary episode, provide comments, or just have a question, get a hold of us at cineversegroup@gmail.com. That's CINEVERSE group@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary podcast to your friends and loved ones. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or CastBox, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that, and leave that rating or review. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook, too. And if you'd like to go an extra step and help keep our show ad-free, consider making a donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate Cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, we encourage you to visit cineversegroup.com. That's the portal for my private film discussion group I launched back in 2005, where you can hear recordings of our group discussions and read in-depth analyses about the different movies we study. How do you possibly follow up a debut film like Citizen Kane? with another masterpiece, of course, although one that fewer people have seen and which was unfortunately altered from the original vision of its director. In August, Cineversary will honor a milestone anniversary of a film that forever changed the trajectory of Orson Welles' career, a movie that refused to dwell in obscurity or be regarded as damaged goods. Join us as we explore the magnificence of The Magnificent Ambersons, which originally debuted in the summer of 1942. Until next time, this is your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and cherish those classic movies, because they're not getting older, or quieter for that matter. They are getting better. Thanks, as always, for giving us a listen.